under lockdown level 3 regulations, cinemas were given the green light to reopen, but most opted to stay closed. Now, some movie chains are gearing up to reopen under these relaxed regulations, with seating capacity limited to about 50 patrons at a time. Cinema staff have been trained in hygiene and preventative measures. These new rules will be making going to the movies a very different experience for both viewers and theatre staff. Ster-Kinekor says they are ready to welcome moviegoers back by the end of this month. For more on this, let's bring in the Deputy CEO of that company, and that's Motheo Matsau. Motheo, thanks very much for your time. Welcome to the AM Report. Let's start just by ascertaining what's changed since level 3 of the lockdown. How has your outlook on the prospect of a market been altered by these ease regulations?
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Thank you for having us this morning. I think not much in terms of the regulations has changed in our case since level 3. We are just glad that people will be allowed to go out. You know, cinema is an experiential industry, and the more people are allowed to go out, the more the likelihood of them coming back to cinema. But from a regulations point of view, as you've mentioned in your preamble, we are still limited to 50 people per auditorium, and you know, we hope to make do with that for the meantime.
You mentioned that, you know, cinemas is an experiential reality, and I couldn't agree more with that. In fact, I'm willing to make the argument that people are more likely to be infected before sitting down and watching the cinema than any other time when they're out at the movies. How are you going to respond to that unique reality? You know, the chit-chattering whilst you're pouring your popcorn in the foyer, etc., etc.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for that question. It's a really good question. We have regulations, or at least we're adhering to the regulations by government. So people will have masks on. There will be very little chit-chattering in the foyers of the cinema. We have forced people, or at least in our case, we have kind of forced patrons to buy their movie tickets and concessions online, so that when you get to cinema, all you do is collect, thereby minimizing the chitter-chatter, as you say. Inside the auditorium, if you're not having your popcorn, you will be required to have your mask on. Other than that, we have social distancing within the cinema itself, in the auditorium itself, and so we don't expect much chitty-chattering. As you would know, there wouldn't have been much chitty-chattering in the cinema auditorium before. So I think with the regulations, an environment that was already not very susceptible to passing on diseases has become even more stringent.
50 people is the maximum that is allowed into the auditorium. Is this worth your while? I mean, how many people were you able to get in before the pandemic?
Well, I think before the pandemic, we could fill the houses. And the fact is, we never filled the houses every day of the week. So our attitude towards the 50 people is that it's a start. We have made a case with the NCC that as an industry, we are capable of actually managing 50% capacity as opposed to 50 people. And we've been told that that case is being dealt with at the NCC. But we're going to go ahead. You know, the idea here is to get people used to the idea of coming back to movies. And if it's 50 people that we're allowed to go with, that's what we will go with. And the industry is really, you know, pulling together to make sure that we make our environment safe and give confidence to both our staff and our patrons that the environment is safe to come to. 50 people might be a good start in any case, so that people can tell others that, you know, I've been to the cinema, it's safe, it's clean, they're following protocol, and hopefully in a few months' time we will get that number up.
I mean, you speak about getting people used to going back to the movies again, and I think at the back of your mind, that's because, you know, even during this period, it's not like people haven't been watching anything. You're coming into a very different landscape, in some respects taken over by the likes of Showmax, Netflix, etc. How confident are you that you even still have a market to begin with?
Oh, we're very confident. So, you know, the Showmaxes and Netflixes came long before the pandemic. And even though they've given people an alternative, we believe, and we've seen in the numbers and in the research that we've done, they are not a complete substitute for cinema. As I said before, you know, the experience, you know, the cinema-going experience cannot be replaced or replicated through a Netflix experience. You know, those platforms offer convenience, And of course, during the pandemic, when everybody was at home, it would have been expected that people will consume more of that. We think we still have a market. We've seen our patrons write back to us saying, you know what, I've exhausted my bouquet. I've watched everything there is to watch on Showmax. I've watched everything there is to watch on Netflix. Please open. I want to come back to the movies. So we're quite confident. We are very clear that, the more content there is, the more content people consume. And in fact, all our research tells us that the cinema goers are the highest consumers of those platforms in any case.
That's interesting. You speak about content. Many productions in Hollywood, here at home, have had to close down because of the pandemic. How much of a new offering is there already, given what I imagine would have been a big lag in the producing of new content for cinemas?
Yeah, so under normal circumstances, we're averaging between 5 and 8 new movies a week. This time of opening on the 28th of August coincides with the release of content from Hollywood. And so we expect, we'll start slow. I think we expect about 4 or 5 new titles when we do open in that week. And then it will ramp up as the months go. So we are confident that the content will start flowing. We've seen reports out of Hollywood that they will release content even ahead of the US in some territories where the industry is operating. And I think South Africa will be one such industry.
Of course, there's also a desperate need to be incredibly competitive during this period. I remember before the pandemic, a big sticking point, for lack of a better term, around going to the movies is the cost. Many people felt it's steep. I imagine at the very least there won't be a change to the cost, let alone an escalation of that fee to make up for the overheads that, without a doubt, will be much more heavy as you open up at the end of the month.
Yes, and I can't speak for the rest of the industry in that regard, but I can speak for ourselves. So the lockdown began on the 28th of March, and we had already instituted a slight price adjustment for the 1st of April. And that is the pricing that we will go in with. And to be fair, it is not really a price increase. There will be some sites where the prices come down. Our aim over the last 2 years has been to try and get a uniform pricing across most of our circuit. So we'll have maybe 2 or 3 categories of pricing, as opposed to in the past when our pricing was all over the place, and depending on which cinema you went to, you would pay a different price. So we have had a look at our pricing. It was our normal annual price increase time in any case, but as you said, we have not gone and taken the usual price increase that we would have taken under normal circumstances.
And what is the biggest contributor to those prices, by the way, just out of interest? What costs Ster-Kinekor the most to keep the business running?
So any cinema business has 3 structural costs. The main one is rentals, followed by salaries and wages, and then of course the film rentals. And depending on the content that you're buying at the time, that order may change. But those are the 3 structural costs. And remember, as you mentioned, we buy our content out of the US, and that pricing is done in dollars. So you can imagine what happens when the rand performs the way it has. And also, again, as I said, our rental costs come into play. We are tenants in shopping malls, and when those shopping malls take their price increases, it impacts us. But those are the 3 structural sort of price points that we look at to determine what pricing we should be at.
All right, thanks for getting us into the picture. I wish you well as we get into this new normal. Of course, we're all trying to stay afloat in ways we know how. Thank you very much for your time indeed. Motheo Matsau is the Deputy CEO at Ster-Kinekor.